sets. That's the role of Face the Nation, to focus on the issues at hand. That means a civil, contextualized conversation with perspective.
CBS News, 60 Minutes, Sunday on CBS.
Tonight, the growing auto strike turns into a campaign square-off between Biden and Trump. Then, why many families are about to have a tougher time finding affordable childcare, and why millions of Americans on the Gulf Coast are under threat of losing safe drinking water.
Secure that border, and we'll be able to keep it all open and keep it all worked out.
We can solve this quickly if he would just go outside his Republican caucus and talk to Democrats.
You deserve the significant raise you need and other benefits.
I think it was a mistake he wasn't on the first debate stage, and his numbers have dropped a bit. He's not going to be on the second debate stage. I think that's going to hurt him.
Hello, everyone. I'm Major Garrett in Washington. Welcome to America Decides. In late December 1936, a shattering moment of labor resistance occurred in Flint, Michigan. This spark of union solidarity was eventually embraced by President Franklin Roosevelt. At the time, it was the most aggressive pro-labor move by any U.S. president. Now, the story of the so-called sit-down strikes against General Motors is way too long to tell in full here. This is the upshot. Under FDR in 1935, Congress passed the Wagner Act that legalized the formation of unions and established the right to strike and to collectively bargain. Corporations hated this new law. GM, then the largest manufacturing company in the world, tried to break up any union organizing within its factories. Members of the newly formed United Auto Workers organized anyway. To protest harsh and dangerous working conditions, about 50 assembly line workers in Flint, Michigan, sat down on the job, and they wouldn't budge. Their idea eventually spread, and 50 factories were idled. Roosevelt sided with the workers and urged GM to negotiate. GM recognized the union, agreed to some of its demands, and vowed not to interfere with union recruitment. From then until now, there has not been as public a sign of support for the UAW from a sitting president. That is, until President Biden joined the picket line outside a GM plant near Detroit today. And that is where we find our Robert Costa. Bob, it's great to see you. Summarize the day for us.
It's great to be with you. I have been here covering the picket line all day near Detroit, and it's evident that President Biden's visit here today struck a chord with the labor movement in Michigan and has sent a signal around the country that a president who claims to be the most pro-union president in history is walking the walk in their view. There's some skepticism here on the picket line outside this Ford plant in Wayne, Michigan, that Biden's going to be able in any way to spark a change in the negotiations, and the union president of the UAW, Shawn Fain, remains at the table with the auto companies trying to figure out how this is going to go. But it's the symbolic gesture from the president that has really moved people here on the picket line. And it's part of an ongoing battle for the working voter in Michigan and around the country, especially ahead of former President Trump's visit here tomorrow.
And, Bob, you mentioned Shawn Fain, who is the UAW president. The UAW has yet to endorse President Biden's reelection, but they spent some time together en route to the picket line, and they're on site, correct?
They did. They had a conversation about how the negotiations were going with the auto companies. And President Biden's remarks were pretty straightforward when he came to the plan and he met with the workers on the picket line. He said, stick with it. Stick with it. Hold the line. And based on my conversations today with union members, they said that that line in particular, stick with it, really resonated with them. And they believe in many quarters here that ultimately Shawn Fain and the UAW leadership will back President Biden for re-election, though no formal announcement of any support at this time. But for Fain and Biden to be there, president and union leader, it sent enough of a message about where things stand, at least politically.
And, Bob, was it your impression there talking to those on the picket line that solidarity is strong and that the nation and the auto industry, at least those that are influenced by union tactics, may be in for a prolonged strike?
They're ready for it. There's a lot of economic pain out there in Michigan, and people are feeling it. Some union members say they're better prepared for a longer strike than others, but they don't see this ending anytime soon. But there is a hope, a flicker among some of these union members that the president's visit, as you said, something that's so historic, it's so rare to see a president join a picket line and take this kind of stand with labor, that perhaps that will send a message politically and in the negotiations that there needs to be something done as soon as possible. But as for now, it's all to be determined.
And Bob, I want to ask you about something you referred to also. Former President Trump due in the region tomorrow. Did you pick up any sense from those on the picket line that they care about that Trump visit one way or the other?
The former president is scheduled to be at a non-union facility here in the Detroit area. He may or may not visit a picket line. It's not clear based on our reporting what exactly he's going to do on the ground beyond visit this non-union facility during prime time on Wednesday night and make remarks while he skips the Republican debate ongoing in California. But based on our conversations with associates of the former president, he wants to make a play for Michigan with the expectation that he could be the nominee for the Republican Party next year. He won Michigan in 2020. Excuse me, he won Michigan in 2016. President Biden won it in 2020 by about 3 percentage points. And it's going to be one of those places, if Trump's the nominee and President Biden's the nominee, that Michigan is a place they will all come back to again and again, because strategists in both parties, as you well know, say Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan, but really Pennsylvania and Michigan and Wisconsin. Those are going to be the places where you have to play and connect with people who are auto workers and union members.
On the scene for us, Robert Costa, thank you so very much. A growing number of Democratic senators are calling on Senator Bob Menendez of New Jersey to resign in the wake of a federal bribery indictment. Menendez has so far rejected calls to step down. The Department of Justice says the senator and his wife accepted hundreds of thousands of dollars in bribes from 3 businessmen. CBS News congressional correspondent Nicole Killian joins us now. Nicole, always great to see you. What's the latest on the Menendez front?
Well, as you mentioned, there are growing calls for the senator to step aside from his own colleagues in the Senate. Of course, we saw a wave of politicians from New Jersey who called for the senator's resignation over the weekend. But in the Senate, we are now at over more than a dozen members who believe that he should step down, most notably New Jersey Senator Cory Booker, who really reserved judgment for a couple of days, but issued a pretty lengthy statement today saying that after going through some of these allegations, that it was hard to recognize the person that he knows and that he believes it is in the best interest of the senator and his constituents for the senator to step down. We are also starting to hear from more Senate Republicans. Just a short time ago, for instance, Marco Rubio not going all the way and calling for the senator to resign, but he did say that these are nasty allegations. But he said ultimately this should be up to a jury to decide, not up to politicians. So there is a variety of reaction that we continue to get. Of course, the Senate expected to vote this evening, and so we certainly expect to hear more in the halls from members as they return here to Washington today.
Nicole, you had a lively and news-making interaction with Speaker Kevin McCarthy. Catch us up on the latest in the shutdown scenario talks and maneuvers.
Well, the latest is really, when you talk about the House and Senate, they're kind of like two ships passing in the night, going in completely opposite directions. Of course, over in the Senate just a short time ago, both Senate leaders, Mitch McConnell, as well as Chuck Schumer, announced that they would move forward with a bipartisan, short-term, continuing resolution to fund the government for a short period of time. That would include disaster relief as well as Ukraine funding. But here in the House, they are operating a little differently. Instead of moving forward with a short-term package, they're actually taking up some of these appropriations bills. And so there will be a vote happening today on efforts to move those appropriation bills forward. But, the Speaker says that as far as these bills are concerned, he really wants to make sure that they include legislation to strengthen border security. That really is a sticking point for House Republicans, particularly from more conservative members of the party. And so I talked to the Speaker about that and whether or not that could potentially lead to a government shutdown. But what do you tell to the workers who are concerned they're going to get furloughed next week? Because
Well, I
There
would
is
tell
no
them.
agreement
It's
in
very-
either
and
chamber,
it-
sir.
I know, and it's easy. All the president has to do is say, you know what? As one of my fundamental jobs as the president of the United States is to secure a border.
So that's
And that border is not secure. Secure that border and we'll be able to keep it all open.
Can you guarantee that there will not be a shutdown at the end of this week?
Look, I have worked all my time to make sure that there would not be a shutdown.
So the speaker not saying definitively whether or not there will be a shutdown at the end of the week. Certainly, he has put up a number of different proposals, again, with these appropriations packages being the latest one. But he even went so far as to say, Major, that he thinks it may be worth having a meeting with President Biden over this issue of the border. So that is kind of a new component of this. We don't know if that's something that the White House is willing to entertain. But the bottom line is whatever passes over here in the House is likely not to move forward in the Senate. What comes over from the Senate may not pass the House. So really, both chambers appear to be on a collision course.
Legislative ships passing in the night, as you said, Nicole Killian. Thank you.
You bet.
Towns along the southern border are seeing a sharp increase in immigrants and asylum seekers. Next, we'll speak with Texas Democratic Congressman Henry Cuellar about steps he would like to see taken. You are streaming America Decides.
If it's important to our nation,
I wonder how you think about where America is at this moment.
it's on Face the Nation.
Can there be stability if Vladimir Putin remains in power?
Face the Nation with Margaret Brennan on CBS.
America Decides, taking you inside American democracy.
The most important stories on a day-to-day, hour-to-hour basis.
You're going to hear a lot of reporting.
It is clearly a pivotal moment.
Gun control, the economy, education. Both sides of the political aisle fight it out for power.
Bringing you the analysis that you need.
Thoughtfully, with context.
Be part of the conversation.
On CBS News Streaming.
Welcome to America Decides.
An original documentary from CBS reports.
I always tell people that Twitter would not be Twitter without Black Twitter. It's just us being in fellowship with each other.
And it becomes a conversation you don't want to be left out of.
People really started to recognize the power of activism on Twitter.
Based on that one tweet, the hashtag Oscar So White was trending around the world.
If anything has really powered Black Twitter, it's been humor.
If your food ain't right, oh, we're going to tell you about that, too.
We tend to create change, create culture and cool.
That's how movements happen on Black Twitter and go beyond more than that.
Black Twitter, the Twitterverse that changed a generation. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
When weather turns extreme,
the threat of severe weather and dangerous tornadoes is expected to last.
CBS News and the Weather Channel bring you virtual weather technology so advanced, so real.
Let's bring in our partners at the Weather Channel.
Now 6 feet of water, imagine that. Cars that can act like battering rams.
These hyper-realistic simulations show you what the weather will look and feel like before it happens.
Feel the forecast, streaming on CBS News.
An original documentary from CBS reports.
The carnage in our nation's schools has become painfully repetitive.
Not one more child!
School shootings have parents fighting mad.
I promised my daughter I was going to fight. It's going to keep on happening.
And teachers taking lessons in how to fight back.
This is an exercise.
We approach it as it's you or them.
It shouldn't have to be your teacher's job to protect your life.
But will the battle over gun control,
people are afraid that they're going to lose their gun rights altogether,
be the hardest lesson of all?
The exercise, you're having to shoot at an adult. Are you prepared to have to kill one of your students?
Guns in the Classroom, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
She's the most successful alpine skier, male or female, ever, and a worldwide inspiration.
We need a lot of women doing sports really, really well.
The story of Michaela Schifrin's game-changing reign at the top of the slopes when we go person to person.
Welcome back to America Decides. Border towns are running out of space and resources as the U.S. experiences a record high number of asylum seekers. This influx comes as a potential government shutdown looms over disagreements on federal funding. Several officials are now warning this shutdown if it occurs, could significantly hinder efforts to improve conditions for Border Patrol agents, overwhelmed towns, and the migrants themselves. Texas Democratic Congressman Henry Cuellar joins us now from his office on Capitol Hill. Congressman, good to see you. In what can only be described as a rhetorical shift, House Speaker Kevin McCarthy said this morning to our Nicole Killian that it's President Biden who needs to resolve the looming government shutdown scenario by changing border policy. Your reaction?
Look, we can talk about how we address the border, but the first immediate things that we need to do right now, the most immediate thing is to do a CR so we don't have a government shutdown. He's got to own it. He's the Speaker of the House. He can shift blame over, but we can solve this quickly if he would just go outside his Republican caucus and talk to Democrats.
If the Speaker were to reach out to House Democrats like you, what would you want in return?
Well, first, let's just have a little bit of time. I sit on the appropriations. I'm the ranking member for Homeland Appropriations. To do 12 appropriations with the Senate, you got to have a little bit of time. You can't do it in 2 weeks, 30 days. You got to have time to conference and sit down. So I would just say give ourselves a little bit of time, and then we can debate about border security. Because, again, look, I'm one of those that I just left the border to come over here. I know exactly what's happening there. But again, the immediate thing that we need to address is the shutdown of the government.
And for our audience, a CR means continuing resolution. That is essentially a stopgap spending bill that keeps everything operating, typically, if history is any guide, on last year's budget numbers. But it keeps the government opening. It gives space for everyone to do, as you suggested, work things out in terms of the individual appropriations bills. But as you know, Congressman Cuellar, the Speaker hasn't done that yet because he can't find the votes. And he fears if he does find the votes with Republicans and some Democrats, he might lose his speakership over that. Any advice to the Speaker in this precarious spot?
Look, if you have a Band-Aid, either you pull it out slowly or do it quickly. I mean, he's got to know whether he's got the votes to stay as Speaker. I mean, I want to work with Speaker McCarthy, but he can't go outside his circle because he fears that somebody's going to file a motion to vacate. If he's able to work with us, some of us will be able to table the motion to vacate so we can keep the process moving.
Would you be willing to do that? Would you willing to be at least a short-term temporary ally of Speaker McCarthy to see this resolved?
Oh, absolutely. As long as he talks to our Democratic leaders, and I'm talking about Hakeem Jeffries, we can work this out. In fact, I've talked to some of the members that are willing to go ahead and table a motion to vacate if he's willing to work with us. And if he's so concerned about border security, keep one thing in mind. The Border Patrol agents are not going to get paid, so that doesn't help border security. And there are some authorities, some laws that have to be extended. For example, counter drones, that the drug cartels use, that will go away on September 30th. So it's to the interest of border security to make sure that we continue the government running.
I want to drill down on that ever so briefly, Congressman, because you told Time Magazine if there is a shutdown of any duration, border control operations will noticeably suffer. You mentioned a couple of items. Any other things you want to make sure our audience understands about the implications of a shutdown?
Well, look, I talked to Border Patrol agents when I was coming over here, when I left Laredo. They get paid on every 2 weeks. So they're on a check by check. They're essential. That means they're going to continue working, including the ones involved in commerce, the ones in blue. They will continue. But what about the support staff? What about the other things that have to be going that we have to keep our government running? They'll get paid eventually. But I think with all this pressure that they're facing at the border and get their checks cut, that doesn't help. The authorities, which are changes in the laws or keep the laws going, the drug cartels use drones. We won't be able to do the counter drone programs if we have a shutdown. So border security will be hurt if we shut down the government.
Quickly, how would you rate the president's performance on immigration?
Improvement. He certainly needs improvement. Look, what we need to do is, and I say this not only to the president, but to my Republican friends, we got to have repercussions at the border, but we just can't play security or border security on the 1 yard line called the U.S.-Mexico border. What we need to do is to extend the perimeters, make sure that Mexico does more, because if you look at 2015 under Obama, 2019 under President Trump, those numbers went down. Why? The main reason was because Mexico was stopping people on their southern border before they got over here. We got to play defense outside the 1 yard line called the U.S.-Mexico border.
You're not a member of the United States Senate, Congressman, but there have been quite a few calls today, new ones, among Senate Democrats, for Robert Menendez, the senior senator from New Jersey, to resign in the wake of his second indictment by federal prosecutors. Do you want the senator to resign? Do you think he should?
Well, I think we should let the judicial system and the voters of New Jersey to make that decision. Right now, my focus as a member of the Appropriations Committee is to make sure we don't have a shutdown on September 30th.
Would you suggest to other Democratic senators that they hold their fire on this? Do you have any comment for those senators who haven't and who called for him to resign?
I'm sticking to the House. That's something that the Senate needs to work out among themselves.
Congressman Henry Cuellar from Texas, thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Major.
New York State judge has ruled former President Trump committed fraud while building his real estate empire. The ruling was made in a civil lawsuit brought by New York's Attorney General. The judge found the former president and his company overvalued assets on paperwork used in making deals. The decision comes days before the start of a non-jury trial in that case. 7 GOP presidential candidates are expected to take the stage for Wednesday's second presidential debate. That list does not include former President Trump. More on his absence next. You are streaming America Decides.
Weather turns extreme. CBS News and the Weather Channel bring you virtual weather technology so advanced, so real, you'll have time to get prepared. Feel the forecast. Weather when it matters most on CBS Mornings.
An original documentary from CBS Reports.
That desired farm, it's a wonderful place to raise children, and it still is.
Promises broken.
Black Americans have been the target of racism and discrimination pretty much from the time they acquired ownership in the land.
Costing black farmers hundreds of billions in generational wealth.
They did everything to make sure we were run off that land.
But communities are uniting to continue the fight.
Collective ownership is powerful.
To keep their land and their dreams alive.
To watch my children play on land that we own means everything.
So land is power.
Most definitely.
40 Acres and a Mule, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Politics isn't a game. Why aren't you holding yourself to that standard? Politics is about policy. Was this the right way to actually get this done? I'm a voracious consumer of information, and I'm impatient. I don't like to be spun. To be moderator of Face the Nation is not an anchor, it's not an actress. You are up here to moderate a conversation. That means bringing the most powerful stakeholders to the table to become better informed.
America Decides, taking you inside American democracy.
The most important stories on a day-to-day, hour-to-hour basis.
You're going to hear a lot of reporting.
It is clearly a pivotal moment.
Gun control, the economy, education, both sides of the political aisle fight it out for power.
Bringing you the analysis that you need.
Thoughtfully, with context.
Be part of the conversation.
On CBS News Streaming.
Welcome to America Decides.
She is a beloved American icon and head of a media empire. But is Oprah Winfrey happy? How do you define happiness?
Yeah, I call it happiness.
Find out when we go person to person.
An original documentary from CBS Reports.
It was genocide, a deliberate effort by the United States government to eliminate the food source that was relied upon by Native American tribes.
American bison were slaughtered and Native Americans displaced.
And that's how tribes were subjugated to reservations and our lands were taken.
But now, through conservation efforts at Yellowstone,
Buffalo provided everything that we needed. Now they need help.
A herd grows.
We need to step up and help them.
And a culture is reborn.
When the buffalo return and come back, that's when our tribe will begin to heal.
Yellowstone Bison Revival, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Welcome back to America Decides. Former President Trump, as we mentioned a moment ago, won't be joining his fellow Republican presidential hopefuls at the second debate tomorrow night. And here's something interesting. We have new CBS polling that shows his reluctance to debate isn't really hurting him, at least not in the early voting states. Take a look at this. Our poll finds that in New Hampshire, Trump is up 37 points on his closest rival. That would be Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. In Iowa, that lead shrinks to a smaller but still quite robust 30-point advantage for the former president. Now, despite these gaudy numbers, our poll also finds the majority of likely GOP voters in Iowa and New Hampshire say right now they are considering Trump and, big word, and other candidates. CBS News senior White House and political correspondent Ed O'Keefe joins us now from Los Angeles. Ed, what are the biggest takeaways for you on our new polling data?
Go back to that third graphic we were just showing the viewers, and I think that's the one that is the reason why these other non-Trump candidates still get out of bed in the morning and still are making the trip out here to California to hold this debate tomorrow night. Because if you add up there the 48 plus 31 or the 43 plus 34, that is larger than the less than a quarter of voters in those two early states that say they are only considering and will stand by the former president. So what do you have to do over the course of the next few debates that will continue to be held month after month? The next one at the Reagan Library north of here tomorrow. You have to find ways to get people off the stage so that you are one of the only few left standing by the time votes are cast in that caucus in mid-January in Iowa and then later in New Hampshire and beyond. And I would argue, based on our numbers compared to some of the ones that have been released in the last 2 weeks or so, this has got to give some relief to the DeSantis campaign that he appears to be the only guy in double digits besides the former president, even if he's still 30 or 37 points back.
Right. 30 points down in Iowa, 51-21, but 21 is better than DeSantis has shown in Iowa and other polls. Yeah. And it is clear that on the spectrum of trying to reach prospective Iowa caucus voters through the ground game and repetitive voter contacts, the DeSantis campaign, through its super PAC, leaning very aggressively into this. And for that reason, not only does Iowa, but the second debate, and any contrast the governor might make with former President Trump, say on the issue of abortion, which historically has resonated in Iowa, might loom large.
Absolutely. And you can expect that the former governor, the former vice president, Mike Pence, Nikki Haley, perhaps to some extent in different ways, will all bring up that issue of abortion, which the former president kind of walked into himself in a recent interview where he questioned whether any kind of early week ban was a good idea for the party or whether it was politically disastrous for them. Even if it is politically disastrous, it's important to social conservative voters in Iowa. It is to a lesser extent in New Hampshire, but certainly still seen as an important bedrock principle for the Republican Party. So you'll see some contrast there. I think, again, you got to think of his contest now, if you're a non-Trump Republican candidate, as a play in three parts, and we're still in Act One. Clear the non-Trump field, be the last person or one of the last two or three standing. Somehow then get past the former president, then somehow take on the Democratic nominee, expected, of course, to be President Biden. So if you are, and let's keep this up here for a second, if you're Mike Pence, you probably want to keep tussling with Vivek Ramaswamy and make him go away. If you're Tim Scott, you've probably got to take issue with some of the things DeSantis and Nikki Haley have been saying. If you're Chris Christie, you want to call out most of these guys who haven't necessarily completely divorced themselves from the former president. It's part of why he and Nikki Haley, for example, are doing better in New Hampshire, because they seem to find slightly more appeal among the moderate Republicans and the independents who can vote in that primary. Iowa's caucus, of course, is closed. And if you're DeSantis, you've got to continue to make the argument against former President Trump and keep Tim Scott, keep Vivek Ramaswamy and others at bay. And if you're Doug Burgum, you just got to find a way to stay on stage because he barely made it. So they all have short-term strategic things they got to accomplish in those 2 hours on the road to taking on Trump.
And it would seem for former U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, Nikki Haley, this experience tomorrow evening at the Reagan Library, looking at where she stands in Iowa and New Hampshire, knowing that she might have a kind of toehold in South Carolina where she was the governor, tomorrow night might be very important for her.
Absolutely. Her and Pence, I would argue, probably can wrap themselves in the cloak of Reagan more than anybody else on that stage and make the argument that they are sort of that old school, deep-rooted conservative Republican, someone who's not skewing or embracing the more populist rhetoric and wing of the party that now exists, and you know, hope that in Iowa and in New Hampshire and in South Carolina and these other states, those old school Republicans that harken back to the days before the former president, Trump, might be hearing her and thinking that's exactly who I want. And look, she's seen some encouraging surveys in the last 10 days or so that suggest in head-to-head matchups, which matter about as much as you know, a broken umbrella in a rainstorm, that she could conceivably beat former President Biden or current President Biden in a general election matchup, better than all the others. And so she can continue to make that argument too. That might help her.
Never without an umbrella, our Ed O'Keefe in L.A. Thank you very much. And a quick reminder, America Decides will be live from Simi Valley, California for the second Republican presidential debate. Join us for an hour-long preview at 5 p.m. Eastern and a post-debate breakdown. No one's going to have a breakdown. We're just going to break down the debate. That's at 11 p.m. Eastern, right here on CBS News. That does it for today. You can stream America Decides Monday to Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern. Quick reminder, you're streaming CBS News.
It's a history-making meeting. 4 extraordinary women who are all 4-star generals and admirals.
How did you deal with being discriminated